Whenever I get a new Codex or army book, one of the first things that I like to do is to flick through the pages and admire the artwork. Not only is it great on a technical level, but it also lends great insight and inspiration into the worlds that Warhammer creates. I was fortunate enough to receive an early copy of the new Genestealer Cult Codex, and this book was no exception. Among the imagery depicting the various cults, their units, and their uprisings, lay one particular piece that caught my attention. This rather gothic depiction of a clamouring hive, led by an aristocratic magus, really struck a chord with me, and I could see why this particular piece of art was chosen for the book's new cover. I was really drawn to the central character, and so set about recreating it. I'll be giving this guide 2 dead animal bits out of 5. It uses parts mostly from 2 kits, along with just a little bit of green stuff work. I began with the Genestealer Cult Magus miniature, specifically the female variant rather than the one from the Brood Coven. While this would give me all the Genestealer flavour for my final model, the main structure of the miniature would in fact come from the Sisters of Battle Canoness. Again, this specific one from the Combat Patrol box rather than the generic, sold separately variant. The reason for choosing a Sororitas here was to give the model a much bulkier and more heavily armoured appearance than the original Magus, giving me something a little closer to the artwork that I was basing this conversion around. With the kit sourced, I began to clip away and clean up the parts from the Canoness, as well as grabbing the rear half of the Magus's torso as well. It was my intention to blend the oversized Magus collar into the neckline of the Canoness's torso. This model already had a fairly impressive collar itself, but I wanted to carry on the iconic look of the Genestealer Cult's leader. First, I clipped away the central strut of the Sister's collar. I used a slight V-shape here so that the cut met precisely in the centre. From here, I then brought in my knife to smooth out and generally clean up the cut. Removing the Magus's collar was achieved in much the same way. I clipped it from the torso with a V-shaped cut before removing the remnants of the small power pack that sat just behind it. With the collars removed, I took the piece from the Magus and compared it against the Canoness's torso. While the two were close to fitting together, they weren't quite flush and weren't leaving enough room to add the head later on. To resolve this, I trimmed both sections with my knife. I made several comparisons between the collar and the torso, just to make sure that I was making the right cuts in the right places. Once everything was fitting together a little more snugly, I then glued them into place. Before I attach the front half of the Canoness torso to the back, I need to make a small adjustment. The inquisitorial symbol would need to be removed, and to do so, I started out with my clippers. These were used to remove the bulk of the plastic, and I followed this up with some smaller and more careful cuts with the scalpel. I followed the flow of the fabric with these cuts, until I was just the chain that remained. This symbol would be replaced with a Genestealer Cult one. I took this from the Magus kit. I clipped it from one end of the sash and tidied up the cut. After comparing the symbol against the torso front, I found that both the symbol and the fabric were sitting a little too prominently. A few more trims to the fabric below the chain and the back of the symbol were then applied until the two could be glued together. Before I could glue everything together, I still needed to remove a few of the fleur-de-lis scattered across the model. I didn't mind retaining a few as they contributed to the gothic stylings of the model. The ones I did remove though were located on the rear part of the shawl, the power pack and the right knee. I trimmed away the bulk of the plastic with the knife before using a scraping motion to flatten out the surface completely. With this done, I could finally glue together the torso and the legs. Now that the torso was together, I felt that the Magus collar looked a little too tacked on and didn't really flow with the rest of the model. To help remedy this, I took the front of the torso from the Magus and carefully clipped away the remaining parts of the collar that were still attached. These were quite fragile and fiddly, so the trims had to be done very carefully. Once I'd managed to liberate the collar's trim, I then glued these into place against the Canoness's torso. I attached these at an angle so that the shape of the collar formed more realistically into the rest of the armour. With the torso finally complete, I could move on to recreating the slashed sleeves that the Magus on the Codex's cover sports. The easiest way to do this was to grab a pair of arms from the Free Guild Pistolers kit. The sleeves were perfect, but I wouldn't need forearms, so these were removed and the cuts were then cleaned up. The right arm was then glued to the torso. I didn't need to make any adjustments to get it to fit, but the left arm was a little too big around the shoulder to be attached without first making a few adjustments. To these arms, I wanted to attach the original Magus arms. I first removed both forearms from the torso piece and shaved them back at the elbows to ensure that they were flat. To the right forearm, I attached the staff to the wrist before gluing it to the upper arm. For the left arm, I needed to make a slight adjustment to the elbow joint as the angle wasn't quite right without this quick trim. Once I was happy with how the elbow was being positioned, I glued it into place and completed the torso. The head was the next hurdle to overcome, and this was also taken from the Magus kit. It's female and has the iconic Genestealer Cult forehead ridges, which made it the perfect candidate for representing the character on the front of the Codex. Its main drawback was that its neck was separate from the head and came sculpted onto the torso, so I needed to make my own. I began by using my pin vise to drill a small 1mm hole into the base of the skull. Into this, I superglued a length of 1mm steel wire and clipped it down to just a few centimeters in length. All I needed to do then was to make a quick check against the torso to check the length of the wire. There was already a hole in the neck, so I didn't need to drill one myself. This wire would serve as the main structure for the neck. Around this, I would add some green stuff, but first I cut and then mixed up the two halves of the putty. I tore away a small amount and wrapped this around the wire, going down only as far as I wanted the neck to be long. With this done, the neck was then added to the torso. I used just a little bit of super glue on the wire too, just to make sure that it stayed put. Once the glue had dried, I then used my sculpting tools to smooth out and blend the green stuff into a more realistic neck shape. I didn't need anything too fancy here, as the area would be hidden quite a bit by the collar. I just needed to fill the gap in between the torso and the head. Speaking of which, I also filled in some of the gaps around the collar to further help blend the Magus' collar into the armor. For both of these areas, I made sure to use some Vaseline. You can also use water here too, and both will work to prevent the putty from sticking to your tools and fingers as you work with it. If you choose to use Vaseline, once the putty has fully cured, I'd recommend giving it a wipe with a bit of tissue to remove any remaining residue. So long as you don't use too much Vaseline, this shouldn't be necessary, but it's better to be safe than sorry. The final adjustment to be made was to the power pack. After removing the fleur-de-lis symbol from the back, I was left with a large and empty space. To resolve this, I would turn to some dead animal bits. I grabbed a Genestealer skull from the Citadel Skulls kit and clipped it in half. I took the front half and smoothed out the cut with a combination of my knife and file. Once I'd ensured it was nice and flat, I glued it to the pack to create a suitably cult-inspired decoration. And with that, the model was built and just needed to be based and painted, which left me with this. And here we have the completed Genestealer Cult Magus, who I painted to match the character in the artwork. I used quite a dark palette here, with the scheme featuring predominantly greys, blacks and reds. This helped to emphasize the very pale and slightly blue hue of the skin. The result is a model that looks quite regal and is a nice alternative to the regular Magus miniature. I also think that by using Sisters of Battle components in this kit bash, I've created something that looks like an infiltrated Adeptus Sororitas order. Maybe these aren't fully fledged Sisters of Battle who have hidden their genetic heritage, but rather a cult that has managed to overrun a convent on their host planet and have established themselves as the new inhabitants. Either way, I don't think it would be completely impossible for an army of Adeptus Sororitas, or at least what appears to be, to serve the four-armed Emperor rather than the Emperor of Mankind. Maybe that's an idea for some future conversion guides. If you enjoyed this video, please do leave me a like. It doesn't seem like a big thing, but it massively helps me out, and if you have any suggestions for future kit bashes and conversions you'd like to see me tackle, then please do let me know in the comment section below. But before I go, let me just say a huge thank you to my ever generous supporters. Currently, my top supporters on Patreon are Jonathan Hart, Ryan Little, Stuart Smith, Tim, Berserker, Daniel Dowling, Dakota the Destroyer, Jake, Jeremy Kaup, Jesse Smith, Casper Limborg, Matthew Chilamidos, Mr. Grimm, and Swedsman. So a big thank you to you guys, and if you also support me on Patreon, buy me a coffee, or you just use my affiliates links, then it is the kind-hearted people such as yourselves that allow me to fund the kits and tools required to build these conversions. And so until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye.